What we look at is law in its entire life cycle. So you can imagine with me for a moment a sort of arc of the life of any law, of an EU directive, for example. And it starts with an idea. It starts with a group of people in a room wanting to solve a problem and wanting to take a snapshot of their ideas about how to solve that problem and put it in a law which will then be binding. That's the first stage. The second is then the very difficult work of working in parliaments to pass the law. The next stage is the implementation of the law, an incredibly important stage. And finally is enforcement, another important one. Another part of the analysis that we did of how civil society groups use the law for environmental protection and increased sustainability in the EU showed that groups were primarily focused only on the passage of laws in the parliaments, either in their member state or in Brussels. Groups did not follow the implementation of laws, nor were they interested in the enforcement of laws. And any lawyer will know that the implementation of a law is at least as important as its passage. The most cross-cutting issue we work on is justice, access to justice, and transparency. It really touches everything we do. And a couple of examples, and then I'd like to get to corporate transparency because I think it will be something that interests you as you work on it every day in a certain way. If you're going to be a corporate investor seeking responsible company behavior, you also certainly need corporate transparency. We began our project there by analyzing the Companies Act of the UK, Companies Act 2006. And there's a book in the back of the room, which, if you're interested, please take a copy of. We brought 40, and if they run out, as I hope they do, there are more available. It is a look at the Companies Act, which was claimed by the government to be a landmark, groundbreaking act that would require greater reporting by all UK companies on social and environmental consequences of their activity. In the book, we actually propose regulations for the UK government's regulatory authority, the Financial Reporting and Review Panel, to implement. We sent them to the FRRP, and they declined. They said, we're not ready at this time to pass any regulations, but thank you for thinking about it. On the other hand, they gave us an invitation, which surprised us. And the invitation was, we have the jurisdiction to review companies' annual reports and to bring complaints against them in court, if necessary, if the reports are inaccurate. So why don't you take a look at companies' reports, pick several that you think may be good examples, and then bring a complaint to us, and we'll deal with it. So if you give a lawyer such an invitation, you know what they're going to do. So we went off and we read a lot of companies' reports. I want to discuss briefly with you another way that one might work on corporate governance issues. And I want to start with a statistic I thought was extremely interesting that came from the UN Global Compact survey last year of CEOs. And they found that 86% of CEOs they spoke with said that they wished that investors would take sustainability criteria more seriously when they made their investment decisions. Extremely interesting, I think. And I guess that the reason they're saying that is that if investors were to do so, those CEOs would have greater support within their company to make decisions which would lead to sustainable behavior, including lower carbon emissions, and so on. How would we act in this way? One way that I'd like for us to consider for a few minutes is to think about investors using their shares to propose resolutions at annual general meetings. Now, I know that that's not much done in the EU, and that there may be a feeling that it's too confrontational a type of activity to undertake. But please bear with me for a moment and let us reason together. A little history. In the 1980s, this type of activity was taken up in the United States. And it was spearheaded by a couple of foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation, which were considered pillars of the community, and indeed are. And it was quickly joined, they were quickly joined by a great many other investors. They began focusing on South Africa during the times of apartheid, but the movement has indeed moved on to other issues, and now one of the main focuses is sustainability. And today there is something called the Investor Network on Climate Risk, which is a $7 trillion network of investors, and they're heavily involved in shareholder activity to reduce the impact on share prices on company performance posed by climate change. An extremely interesting way to think. The resolutions, my team tells me, are clearly having an impact on company behavior. One in 2008 that I remember involved the Ford Motor Company, in which the company agreed to a voluntary 30% cut in fleet CO2 emissions, which was a remarkable achievement to get that agreement. Now, importantly, this is not as confrontational as you might expect, in that fully half of the resolutions that were posed were agreed to by companies without having to be put to a vote. So that the resolutions were posed, the shares were lined up. It was a relatively friendly situation in which the companies said, we do not need a vote on this. We will voluntarily agree to take precisely the steps you're asking. Now, that to me was a revelation that you could move out of the highly confrontational situation of having to propose the resolution, fight it out, vote in an embarrassing way, but merely by proposing the resolution with enough shares to get company buy-in. There are terrific opportunities, I think, in a variety of sectors to use this kind of work. For example, oil and gas companies could be approached on how they're dealing with climate change. Mining companies, like Rio Tinto and other ones I mentioned, could be approached on their environmental and social, the environmental social impacts of their mining work. Utilities, very clear and tightly focused work could be done on their greenhouse gas emissions. That would be a great one. And there are many more. I think we could all agree that companies need to change their behavior quite quickly now. We recognize a variety of global threats. I'm sure everyone in this room would agree to what many of those are. And my feeling is that companies need to lead on many of the changes because it's their activity which pushes the society in one way or another way, and that if they lead, we may see good results quickly. So my question in this regard for you would be, should we use this shareholder tool rather than only the very soft tool of private meetings and private discussions? Would more change happen as a result of using shares in this way?